My name is Lydia Beaumont, and for a long time, I believed holiness was synonymous with silence. That being good meant not feeling too much, not questioning too much, not wanting too much. I was raised to be the perfect pastor's daughter, the one who always smiles sweetly, knows the verses by heart, serves tea at the women's meetings with her blouse, cuffs impeccably buttoned. I was all of that. But there were days when my faith felt like a dress too tight, sewn with the threads of others' expectations. I smiled and said, Amen. But inside, I screamed for something I didn't yet know how to name. And it was at that exact point in my life where everything was too quiet, too organized, too untouched, that he appeared. Cole Turner, a man who carried an entire storm on his shoulders. He came without warning, like distant thunder before the rain. Riding a road-worn motorcycle, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, his face marked not just by time, but by something darker. The first time I saw him, my knees didn't tremble, but my soul did, because there was something about him that challenged every lesson I'd learned since childhood. He didn't apologize for existing, didn't bow to anyone, and yet carried a silence that seemed to beg forgiveness for every step he took in the world. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice seemed to echo straight into parts of me no one had ever dared to touch. I watched him from afar in those first days, trying to convince myself it was just curiosity, just a passing unease. But the truth is, the moment Cole stepped off that bike and crossed the town's gate, something in me woke up, something religion never named, sermons never explained, and obedience never allowed me to feel. I didn't yet know what it was, but I knew it was real. And when a part of us awakens, no faith or fear can put it back to sleep. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it was just a distraction, that I was projecting onto him a story that didn't exist, a meaning that was mere fantasy. After all, what could that man have to do with me? He was shadow, road, and steel, and I was light, hearth, and a flower pressed between the pages of an old hymnal. At least that's how everyone saw me, and in many ways, I saw myself that way too. But even wearing my best composure and telling myself he was just a passing visitor, every time I saw him at the market, near the garage, or crossing the street with his gaze lowered, something inside me stirred, like a taut string vibrating with the approach of a truth about to be spoken. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. As real as the way my father furrowed his brow every time Cole's name was mentioned in church. Cole didn't seek attention, but it was impossible to ignore him. He walked as if carrying the weight of something that couldn't be left behind. And yet, there was an unexpected kindness in his actions. One day I saw him help an elderly woman push her cart stuck in the mud, then walk away without a word, as if he didn't want even gratitude. Another time, he offered to fix a fence for a family known for their stinginess, and refused payment. Others pretended not to see, or preferred to cling to their preconceived notions. But I saw. I noticed. And every small, silent act of his was a crack in the walls my upbringing had so carefully built around my heart. It was weeks later that we finally spoke for real, not by my choice, or his, but because fate, or God, or some force hiding in the wings of life decided it was time. I was walking home alone after a quick visit to the orphanage when a group of young men from town, half drunk and aimless, decided to make comments I'd rather not repeat. It wasn't serious, but I felt exposed in a way I didn't know. And before I could react, he appeared. He emerged from the dark with a firmness that made the men back off with just a few words. There was no violence, just presence, and that was enough. He looked at me for a second, just a second, and said, "You okay?" I nodded, almost voiceless, and he, with the same simplicity with which he appeared, vanished, but not from my memory. That moment, that question, that silent protection, they were more intense than any sermon about God's love I'd heard from the church pews. That's where, without realizing it, my story with Cole began. Not with a passionate exchange of glances or a revealing conversation, but with a gesture, a care, a choice of his to be there, and a silent choice of mine not to forget him. And maybe, deep down, I already knew. This man everyone feared would be the only one capable of showing me a part of myself I'd never dared to know. In the days that followed, everything stayed the same on the outside, and completely different within. The world around me continued its predictable course. The services, the community meetings, the polite smiles, the veiled questions about marriage and the future. But inside me, something new moved with strength and beauty. It was as if a window had opened in my chest, and for the first time, I could feel the true air of life rushing in. My body still sat in the church pews. My voice still sang hymns with sweetness, but my spirit was out there, walking beside Cole, even when no one was by my side. We didn't start meeting every day, nor were there promises, but there was something between us, silent, steady, inevitable. He'd find me sometimes after the sunset, when the world of faith slept and judgments quieted. We walked together through empty streets, and I discovered in his silence a depth I'd never known in religious speeches. He wasn't a man of many words, but each sentence carried more weight and truth than the verses I'd recited since childhood. He didn't speak of God, but there was something divine in the way he listened to me. I didn't need to justify my fears or hide my contradictions. With him, I could just be without explaining. One night when the wind felt colder than usual, he told me part of his past. Not everything, just enough. An accident, a loss, a guilt he carried like an invisible tattoo in his bones. He didn't cry, but his voice trembled. And I, without saying a word, held his hand. Not to console him, but to say, "I see you." And in that gesture, I felt a strange and wonderful truth. I trusted him more than I'd ever trusted any man. And that scared me deeply. Because what do you do with that trust, with that feeling growing even without a name? What do you do with this love sprouting where only caution should exist? The guilt came soon after, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because I was starting to feel divided, as if I were betraying not just my upbringing, but my father, my church, my story. My father's face came to mind constantly, stern, upright, but incapable of understanding that I was living something beyond what he'd dreamed for me. I began to pull away from Cole a little. Nothing he questioned. He just understood. His eyes asked, but his mouth respected, and that hurt even more, because I knew he wouldn't give up on me. He just waited. And what hurt most was knowing that, sooner or later, I'd have to choose between the life given to me and the life I wanted to live. Deep down, I knew. That choice was approaching like a silent storm, and it would come. Because the love I felt could no longer fit in disguises or half words, and when it became too visible to hide, the world around me wouldn't stay silent. The storm didn't warn when it arrived. It just crashed over me on one of those Sundays, when everything seemed too calm. The routine went on as always. The morning service, my father's sermon, the greetings at the exit. But there was a comment, simple, venomous. A church lady whispered to another that the pastor's daughter has been keeping good company, or maybe not so good. I was close enough to hear, and for a moment the ground beneath me seemed to give way. Not because of the gossip, I'd expected it, but because in seconds it would spread like wildfire. And worst of all, my father heard. That night there was silence in the house. Not the serene kind when we're at peace with life, but a tense, hollow silence, when words haven't been spoken yet, but are already hurting. We ate dinner with the cutlery striking the plates like daggers, until he, with a cold voice, asked, "Is it true?" I took a deep breath. So many times I'd imagined this moment. So many times I'd wished for courage to face it. But now that it was before me, I felt torn between the love I'd received and the love I'd chosen. And then I answered with what strength I had left. Yes, I see him, and he sees me. His chair creaked as he pushed it back from the table. He didn't yell, but his look said everything. Disappointment, confusion, fear. Not for me, but for what people would say, for reputation, for the family's image. And in that moment I realized that for him, love was less dangerous than judgment. I stayed in my room for hours, sitting on the edge of the bed, not knowing whether to cry or laugh, because deep down it was almost comical. My whole life was built to please, to serve, to not fail. And now, for loving someone who treated me with more dignity than any man in the congregation, I was the disgrace. I was the rebellious daughter, the lost one, the wayward. And it was in that moment I understood. I needed to leave, not out of anger, not out of impulse, but because something in me refused to die. The next morning, before the sun even rose, I went to the garage where Cole worked. He was alone, wiping his hands with a grease-stained rag. When he saw me, he didn't ask anything. He just approached, slowly, as he always did. I said everything at once, that my father knew, that the town would know, that I might lose everything, position, respect, stability. And he just looked at me with that gaze full of restrained tenderness and said, "Then come lose everything with me." It wasn't an invitation. It was an embrace, a promise, a hand extended in the midst of ruin, and I took it. Not because I was ready, but because I knew, for the first time, I was making a choice that was mine alone. I left my house with a small suitcase, a full mind, and a strangely light heart. There were no screams, no slamming doors, no dramatic goodbyes, just the sound of my own choices echoing within me. My father didn't stop me, but his silence was harsher than any words. He looked at me one last time, as if trying to understand, where he'd lost his daughter, not realizing he'd never truly had her. He'd created the image of a woman shaped by obedience, sacrifice, purity. But the woman I was becoming was different. She was made of faith, yes, but also of courage. Courage to love, to err, to begin. I went to Cole's house, a simple small place, but it welcomed me like a shelter after a long desert crossing. He didn't say he was happy. He didn't ask if I was sure. He just opened the door, offered me coffee, and let me stay silent until my hands stopped trembling. He understood that what I was leaving behind wasn't just a house. It was a lifetime built on expectations. And now, for the first time, I was walking without maps, without approval, only with the truth beating in my chest like a new heart. We began to live a routine that was ours, made of small gestures, simple sharings, few words, and long looks. Cole remained that man of deep silences, but now I listened to each silence as if it were poetry. He showed me his world with patience, the way he ran the garage, the value he placed on a job well done, the way he kept old photos in a lidless wooden box. Little by little, I revealed myself too, peeling away the layers religion had imposed, without losing faith, but rediscovering a more intimate way to connect with God. A God who didn't shout rules but whispered freedom. The town's gazes followed us, some with curiosity, others with contempt. But over time, the murmurs faded, not because they accepted us, but because they realized there was no scandal. There was love, a steady, mature, serene love. Not a fairy tale, but one of accepted scars, respected pasts, and presents chosen with intention. I started working as a volunteer teacher in a small school, and even some who criticized us began to greet us with a shy nod. We didn't win respect. We earned space, and that was enough. It was one late afternoon, sitting on the porch with bare feet and hands intertwined, that I realized I hadn't lost anything. I hadn't lost my faith, I hadn't lost my identity, and above all, I hadn't lost my path. I'd just changed roads, a harder road, yes, lonelier at times, but true, because there, with Cole, I didn't need to pretend holiness to be loved. I could be whole, with light and shadow, with strength and fear, and he loved me that way. With the months, what was once doubt became a foundation. I no longer needed to explain to anyone why I chose Cole, nor justify where I was or how I lived, because those who truly wanted to understand, understood, and those who didn't, stopped looking. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. We shared everything: quiet breakfasts full of good silence, tight bills at the end of the month, memories that hurt and ones that healed. Cole showed me his love through actions. He wasn't one for pretty words, but he listened with an attention no solitary prayer ever gave me. He respected even my silence, and I loved him more for it. One day my father showed up at the school where I taught. I hadn't seen him since the morning I left. He was thinner, his eyes full of time and his pride worn out. He waited for me outside, hands clasped behind his back. I walked to him slowly, my heart at peace. And when I got close, he just said, "You look happy." I nodded. "I am." He looked at the ground for a while, took a deep breath, and added, "Then it's all right." He didn't apologize, didn't speak of forgiveness. But in that brief meeting, I knew something had changed. He wasn't rescuing me. He was setting me free. And that was enough. We began to talk again, little by little, like rebuilding a bridge, without haste, but with strength. Life with Cole remained simple. Our birthdays turned into inside jokes because neither of us knew how to plan surprises. He taught me to fix small things around the house, and I taught him to fold towels the right way. We became that quiet version of a couple that doesn't need grand gestures to feel secure. When I fell ill for a few days, he stayed by my side without leaving the room, reading my favorite books, even if he didn't understand half the words. And when he had to close the garage because of a shoulder pain that wouldn't go away, we moved to another kind of work together. Him driving deliveries, me organizing orders. We became partners in everything, and that was more than I'd ever asked of God. One day in our backyard, as the late afternoon light turned everything golden, he looked at me with the serene expression I loved so much and said, "If it all ends tomorrow, I've already lived more than I imagined." I held his hand and replied, "You were the prayer I never had the courage to make." Because that's what he was, an unexpected answer, a grace hidden in a lone rider who saved me not from danger, but from myself. The years passed with the lightness of those who no longer need to run. Cole and I aged together, without eternal promises or theatrical vows, just with the routine of choosing every day to stay. He didn't wear a ring, but every time he held my hand in silence, it was as if he said again, "I'm not going anywhere." My father passed some time later in peace, with our relationship restored, even if without many words. Before he went, he left me a letter. It said he'd learned over time that God also works where we least expect, and that the truest faith is the one that embraces. I keep that letter with other memories in a wooden box beside the bed. Today, looking back, I see that loving Cole was the bravest act of my life, and also the simplest, because loving someone like him didn't require effort, just acceptance. He was my refuge, my firm ground, the man who, with all his silences, taught me to listen to my own heart. And when he passed on a calm morning with the sun streaming through the window, he left behind more than memories. He left peace and a certainty that true love doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be lived.